August 18, 1966, Phuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam, where the rubber trees grow in neat rows like soldiers on parade, and the sky can drop an ocean without warning. A Viet Cong battalion commander stands under a poncho that has already failed him. Rain needles down his neck, runs along the spine, pools in the mud at his boots. The plantation is a grid of black trunks and gray sheets of water. Visibility is measured in heartbeats. You see a shape, you hear a shot, and then the jungle swallows both. He listens, not to the thunder, not to the shouting of runners behind him. He listens to the sound that shouldn't exist, steady rifle fire, measured bursts, not the frantic tearing roar of a unit collapsing, not the wild, desperate noise of men firing at shadows to convince themselves they're still alive. This is different, this is calm. His men have been attacking for over an hour, wave after wave, hundreds of bodies pushed forward through mud and rain, machine guns hammering, mortars thumping, officers screaming through whistles and hand signals. The plan is simple: isolate the foreigners and crush them before reinforcements arrive. It's a plan built on experience. It's a plan that has worked before. The foreigners should have broken by now. They should have run, they should have died, but they're still there, still firing, still holding, still speaking on the radio like men taking attendance in a classroom. No panic, no screaming, just short, clipped voices, calm enough to be insulting. The commander feels something he hates to name, not fear, recognition, the kind you get when you realize the enemy is not what you were promised. Because intelligence reports are supposed to be a map. They are supposed to turn war into mathematics, numbers, probabilities, expected outcomes. They are supposed to tell you, if you do this, they will do that. But the map is wrong, and in the rain, in the mud, in this plantation east of Nui Dat, the commander understands the truth his superiors never told him. The Australians aren't like the others, and this is the story almost never told. Not only what happened at Long Tan, but what the enemy thought when they faced Australians for the first time in force, what they expected, what they found instead, and what it cost them to learn it. Early 1966, when the Australian task force arrived in Phuoc Tuy Province, the Viet Cong had every reason to be confident. This was their ground, their villages, their trails, their shadow supply lines woven through the jungle like veins. They had fought here for years, and the province had its own rhythm. Mine warfare, ambush, harassment, then vanish into green darkness. Then the foreigners came again, another flag, another accent, another allied contingent arriving to try their luck. The first reports were straightforward. British Commonwealth forces, close allies of the Americans, similar weapons, similar tactics. Translation: another Western unit that would patrol in noisy groups, chatter on radios, smoke cigarettes in the dark, and rely on artillery and air power like crutches. Another unit that could be bled through ambush and attrition until morale cracked. Just another target. They were half right. Within weeks, something began appearing in Viet Cong after-action reports, not in the big headlines, in the margins. The uneasy details officers wrote down and underlined, because they didn't know what else to do with them. The Australians moved differently. American patrols were often easy to predict. Larger elements, heavier footprints, consistent patterns. Their presence announced itself. Radio chatter, shouted commands, the smell of tobacco, the metallic clink of gear. The Australians didn't announce themselves. They seemed to appear out of the jungle as if the jungle had decided to grow teeth. VC sentries would hear nothing. Then, suddenly, there they were, 50 meters away, sometimes closer, silent, patient, watching. The Viet Cong started using a term that carried more frustration than poetry: Ma Lin, ghost soldiers. And it wasn't just how they moved, it was how they shot. In the jungle, where visibility is a rumor and ammunition is life, fire discipline is the difference between power and noise. Many units fired to intimidate, to fill the air, to feel in control. It had psychological effect. Sometimes it worked, but the Australians didn't spray. They aimed. Automatic weapons were used in short, controlled bursts, single shots for single targets. Fire that sounded almost economical, like hunters who had carried their own ammunition across 1,000 kilometers and refused to waste it. It was a small thing, on paper. In reality, it was everything. What the Viet Cong didn't understand at first was why. Australia's infantry were a mix of regulars and conscripts, yes, but they were led by corporals and sergeants who had spent years in the bush. Malaya, Borneo, jungle warfare that wasn't theoretical, but lived. These weren't officers learning tactics from books. These were NCOs who knew how to read ground, control fire, and keep men alive through discipline and experience. The Viet Cong respected NCO leadership. They built their own units around it. So when they watched Australian sections operate, tight, professional, steady, they recognized something familiar, not an amateur enemy, a competent one. By mid-1966, VC commanders in Phuoc Tuy adjusted their assessments. Australians were dangerous on patrol, quiet, accurate, hard to ambush. But surely, under sustained attack, under weight of numbers and massed fire, they would break like any other foreign unit. No one, they believed, could stand against a full regimental assault. It was a reasonable assumption. It was rooted in experience. They had fought the French. They had watched disciplined armies fracture when pressure didn't stop, push hard enough, sustain fire long enough, and even the best units would lose cohesion. Radio discipline collapsed, officers lost control, men scattered. It had worked at Dien Bien Phu. It had worked across Indochina in smaller, uglier ways. The VC leadership had no reason to believe it wouldn't work again. They confused tactical competence with strategic vulnerability. They believed a company-sized element, isolated, outnumbered, would collapse beneath the sheer weight of a regiment. And so they built a plan on that belief. August 17, 1966, the Viet Cong 275th Regiment regiment began moving into position near the Australian base at Nui Dat. Over 2,000 soldiers, rain-soaked packs, weapons wrapped in cloth, orders whispered down the line. The plan was simple: draw out a small Australian force, isolate it, then destroy it before reinforcements could arrive. A clean victory, a propaganda coup. Proof that the Australians, like everyone else, could be broken. They were about to meet D Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, 108 men, and they were about to pay for a miscalculation that would rewrite their doctrine for the rest of the war. 4:08 p.m., August 18th, D Company moves through a rubber plantation about 4 kilometers east of Nui Dat, following up after a mortar attack on the base the night before. A standard sweep: find the launch site, disrupt the enemy, return. The weather is appalling. Monsoon rain turns the ground into slurry, mud grabs boots like hands, visibility collapses into a gray tunnel between trunks. Every man is soaked through, and then 11 platoon makes contact. Not a probe, not a skirmish, a wall of fire. The Viet Cong believe they have every advantage. The weather reduces visibility. The plantation limits maneuver. Flanking is difficult. Most importantly, D Company is alone, 4 kilometers from base. By the time reinforcements arrive, the Viet Cong expect the battle to be over. They expect chaos. They expect loud, messy panic. Troops firing wildly, officers losing control, the crack of morale snapping. But from the first moment, something goes wrong. Over the radio, no screaming, no frantic shouting. Contact drills begin like a machine switching on. Men hit the ground behind rubber trees. Rifles come up. Fields of fire are established. Section commanders start controlling the rate of fire. Aimed shots. Pick your targets. Conserve ammunition. The Viet Cong are used to volume. Noise as a weapon. They've engaged American units where hundreds of rounds rip in all directions. Impressive psychologically, often negligible tactically. This is not volume. This is purpose. A Viet Cong soldier later tries to explain the shock of it. We attacked. We expected them to run or fire everywhere. Instead, they shot back carefully, like hunters. We lost men immediately. Through the rain, VC commanders observe the difference. They see Australian section leaders moving between positions, visible even in the downpour, directing fire at specific targets. They see men waiting, not shooting at shadows, not wasting rounds on movement, waiting for certainty, then firing. And every time a soldier breaks cover to move forward, he becomes a target. The VC assault tactics rely on momentum, waves of soldiers accepting casualties but maintaining pressure until the enemy's fire slackens. Against the Australians, the fire does not slacken. It is methodical, relentless, rotated, controlled. The mathematics of the battle begin to shift in ways the VC didn't expect. They planned for acceptable losses, 2 for 1, 3 for 1, if it meant annihilating an isolated company. Instead, they are losing 5, 6, sometimes 10 men for every Australian casualty. At that rate, they can still destroy D Company, but the cost will be catastrophic. The commanders face an impossible decision: press the attack and accept a slaughter, or withdraw and accept failure. Neither option is acceptable, so they commit more men, call up reserves, order the assault to continue. Because everyone breaks eventually, everyone has to. The Australians form a defensive perimeter, 3 platoons in a rough line, a 4th held in reserve. Spacing calculated, arcs overlapping, fields of fire cleared as much as the plantation allows. When the Viet Cong charge, they run into something they haven't faced before: fire discipline at scale. The Australians aren't all firing at once. Sections take turns. One section fires while another reloads. Overlapping arcs, controlled bursts. A constant pressure that never becomes frantic. A VC company commander later says, with something like anger, "We thought they would waste ammunition like the Americans, but they fired slowly. Every shot hit someone. We couldn't get close." And then the artillery starts. Not the distant, random thumping the VC expects to be blunted by rain. This is fast, accurate, devastating. New Zealand artillery batteries attached to the Australian Task Force fire 105mm howitzers in near zero visibility, and the rounds land dangerously close. So close it feels impossible. Forward observers with D Company call in missions through the rain. Coordinates relayed, guns laid, rounds away. The VC expected the monsoon to make artillery useless. Instead, it kills them in the open. A captured VC document later admits the shock. The enemy artillery response was faster than expected. Accuracy and poor weather exceeded our assumptions. Heavy casualties resulted. Translation: we thought we were safe in the rain. We weren't. But still, the Viet Cong press on. They have numbers, they have orders, they have the belief that bodies can solve any problem if you throw enough of them into it. By 5 p.m., D Company has been in continuous contact for nearly an hour. Rain is relentless. Mud cakes everything. Weapons jam. Ammunition thins. Men go down. Wounded. Killed. The perimeter shrinks. This is where theory meets reality, where training meets terror, where every man asks himself the same question, even if he won't admit it: do I stay or do I run? The Viet Cong watch for the break. They have seen it before. Discipline cracking like old bamboo. Fear taking over. Soldiers pulling back without orders. It's the moment that wins battles, but it doesn't come. Corporals and sergeants move through the positions. They check weapons, redistribute ammunition, drag wounded men back, keep voices low. Mates pull each other out of the line of fire. Magazines are passed hand to hand. Runners sprint through open ground to resupply sections. Not sentimentality, not a slogan, a survival system. A Viet Cong platoon leader later describes the moment he understood the problem. We expected them to break apart. They did not. They fought like a single organism. When we hit one section, the others supported immediately. There were no gaps. The VC notice other things too. Details their junior leaders will write down later like warnings. When an Australian goes down, the response is immediate and organized. 2 men cover, others shift to fill the gap. The casualty is dragged back, still firing if he can. Treatment begins under fire. No clustering, no chaos, no collapse. Radio discipline remains intact. Even after 2 hours of combat, intercepted traffic is calm. Call signs correct, orders clear, acknowledgements crisp. That suggests the worst possibility for the Viet Cong. The Australian command structure is still intact. The unit is not fragmenting into isolated groups. It is still functioning as a coordinated force, and the steady, accurate rate of fire continues, section by section, methodically covering each other. The VC have thrown everything at these men, and D Company is still there, still holding, still killing. 6 p.m., nearly 2 hours into the battle, the Viet Cong commit everything they have, and finally, they start to push through. Parts of the perimeter are overrun. Fighting becomes close. Grenades, bayonets, grappling in mud, men shouting at shapes they can barely see. 11 platoon is nearly cut off. Ammunition is critical. Casualties mount. This is the moment. This has to be the moment. But even here, at the breaking point, the discipline holds. Platoon commanders give clear orders, sections move in coordination, fire remains controlled as long as there is a magazine to feed it. A Viet Cong veteran will try years later to explain why it felt unnatural to watch. We thought their will would shatter, but their will was stronger than ours that day. Even when we broke through their lines, they did not run. They fought harder. The Australians' rifles, L1A, 1S, LRs, firing 7.62 millimeters, cracked steadily through the rain. Heavy, accurate, reliable in miserable conditions. The VC learned to fear that sound. Not because it's loud, because it's consistent, because it means the Australians are still aiming, and the Australians don't miss the way panicked men miss. 6:15 p.m. Through rain and smoke, D Company hears engines. At first it's a rumor, a low growl beneath the storm, then it becomes real. Armored personnel carriers, 3 troop, 1 APC squadron, crash through the rubber plantation at full speed, loaded with ammunition and reinforcements from A Company. For the Viet Cong, this is the nightmare scenario. They have committed everything to destroying D Company. Their assault lines are extended, formations exposed in the plantation grid. Now armored vehicles hit them in the flank. Machine guns open up from steel hulls. Infantry jump off into mud and chaos, firing and moving. Artillery still falls, and D Company, battered, exhausted, nearly out, rises to counterattack as if the last 2 hours were just a warm-up. A Viet Cong survivor later describes it with a kind of helpless awe. It was as if the earth opened and swallowed our attack. The metal vehicles came from nowhere. The Australians were shouting and shooting. We could not stop them. The assault breaks, not because the Viet Cong run out of courage, because they collide with something stronger than momentum, a unit that will not quit. By 7 p.m., it is over. The Viet Cong withdraw, leaving hundreds of bodies in the plantation. D Company, 108 men, has held against a force more than 20 times its size. 18 Australians are dead, 24 are wounded, but they haven't broken. They haven't run, they have stood, and the Viet Cong will never forget it. The withdrawal is chaotic. Units that had been organized into assault formations are scattered, moving back in small groups. Officers lose contact with men. The carefully planned operation dissolves into something that looks, from a distance, like a rout. In their wake, abandoned weapons, packs, ammunition, documents, mud-soaked evidence of a plan that failed. The Australians don't pursue. They are exhausted, low on ammunition, and they have their own wounded to care for. But they have done something the tactical manuals say shouldn't happen. They have broken a regiment. Not through superior numbers or overwhelming firepower, but through discipline, cohesion, and the refusal to stop fighting when every calculation says you should. The morning after Long Tan, the rain finally stops, and that's when the scale of what happened becomes visible. 245 Viet Cong bodies are counted in and around the Australian perimeter. Captured documents and later assessments suggest total casualties killed and wounded exceeds 600. For the Viet Cong, it isn't just a defeat, it's a revelation. In the days that follow, VC commanders conduct their own analysis. The question isn't only how they lost, it's why their assumptions failed. The first mistake, assuming Australians would fight like Americans. This isn't an insult. American tactics emphasize firepower and mobility, call airstrikes, bring artillery, apply overwhelming force. Effective, but different. Australians fought like infantry who trusted their rifles more than support that might not arrive in time. Fire discipline wasn't just a skill, it was doctrine drilled into every soldier. You have 20 rounds in your magazine, make everyone count. The VC attacked in waves expecting panic fire and empty magazines. Instead, they ran into controlled, aimed fire that never truly stopped. The second mistake, believing the weather would protect them. Monsoon rain, near zero visibility, mud everywhere. Surely artillery would be useless. They were catastrophically wrong. Forward observers kept calling missions, guns kept laying, rounds kept landing close. Danger close, but accurate enough to be lethal to attackers. The third mistake, the most important, was psychological. The Viet Cong believed any unit under enough pressure would break, morale would crack, men would stop following orders, survival instinct would override discipline. It was a reasonable assumption. They had seen it happen. But they misunderstood something fundamental about these Australians. Mateship wasn't a word, it was an operating system. When a man knows his mates won't leave him, when he knows someone will come for him if he goes down, fear changes shape. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes shared, distributed, managed. No one wants to be the first to run, no one wants to be the one who lets the others die, so no one runs. A VC report will later note, in plain language that sounds almost puzzled, the Australians did not fight as individuals, they fought as a collective. Breaking one man did not break the unit. In the end, the Viet Cong miscalculated the one thing that mattered most. Not numbers, not firepower, will. The will to stand when everything says run. The will to keep firing when the odds are impossible. The will to hold because your mates are counting on you. The Viet Cong had will too, but at Long Tan they met Australians and discovered theirs wasn't stronger. After Long Tan, the 275th Regiment pulls back to rebuild. They have lost nearly a third of their strength in an afternoon. But what they lose that hurts most is not only men, it's certainty. In the months that follow, Viet Cong assessments change. Captured documents and prisoner interrogations reveal new caution regarding Australian forces. They note several things. 1. Australians patrol differently. Smaller groups, quieter, harder to detect, often comfortable moving at night as if the jungle belongs to them. 2. Australian fire discipline is exceptional. Do not expect wasted ammunition. Every burst means casualties. 3. Australian NCO leadership is formidable. Corporals and sergeants keep units functioning even in chaos. 4. Australians are hard to break psychologically. Isolation and surprise, tactics that work on others, do not reliably work on them. A late 1966 VC training document states, Australian units should be considered dangerous at all levels. Avoid engagement unless numerical superiority is overwhelming. Do not assume they will withdraw under pressure. That sentence is not admiration, it is a warning. And warnings change behavior. Large-scale attacks against Australian positions become rare. The VC adapt. Smaller ambushes, hit and run, mine warfare, harassment, anything that avoids set-piece battles like Long Tan. Individual soldiers change too. Stories spread. The men who fought there tell others what they saw. An enemy that didn't break, that maintained discipline when chaos should have won. This creates a psychological effect the VC leadership can't ignore. Troops become hesitant to engage Australians unless necessary. Not defeatism, calculation. Because the VC are fighting a long war of attrition and trading heavy casualties for limited gains makes no sense when easier targets exist. Australian patrols begin to find strange evidence. Trails that suddenly veer away, camps hastily abandoned, signs of observation that never become ambush. The VC are watching. They know where the Australians are. They are choosing not to fight, unless the circumstances are overwhelmingly favorable. It creates an odd kind of mutual respect. The Australians know the VC are skilled, determined, patient. The VC know the Australians are the same. Both sides understand the price of engagement, and sometimes both sides decide the price is too high. 18 Australians die at Long Tan. Their names are carved at the Long Tan Cross, remembered every August 18th by the men who stood with them and by a nation that understands what they did. The veterans of D Company never demanded glory. Many resisted the grand comparisons, the talk of legendary last stands. To them, it was simpler. It was doing the job they were trained to do, following orders, trusting training, looking after mates. And that simple explanation is what makes it unsettling. Because in military terms, what happened shouldn't have been possible. The mathematics don't work. One company isolated against a regiment should be destroyed in minutes, not hold for hours. But mathematics doesn't count the human factors. Discipline under fire, trust in leadership, the refusal to abandon wounded friends, the muscle memory of training taking over when fear tries to seize the wheel. These things don't fit neatly into manuals. They can't be quantified, but they are real. And at Long Tan, they mattered more than any number on a map. The legacy of Long Tan reaches beyond the battle. It shapes how Australians think about training, leadership, and cohesion. It becomes a case study in small unit tactics and the power of NCOs to keep men alive when everything collapses. And for Vietnamese veterans who fought there, it remains a memory of facing an enemy that earned respect, not through myth or propaganda, but through professional competence and unshakable resolve. Years later, when former enemies meet, the words that surface again and again are not romantic. Quiet, professional, accurate, stubborn. One former Viet Cong soldier says it plainly. They were very dangerous. They moved like us, quietly, patiently, but they shot more accurately. And they never left their wounded behind. Never. Another remembers the lesson that spread like fire through the ranks. At Long Tan, we thought we would destroy them. Instead, they taught us not to underestimate anyone. They fought like men defending their home, even though they were far from it. Because that is what Long Tan was in the end. Not just a battle in a rubber plantation, not just an afternoon of rain and mud and impossible odds. It was the day the Viet Cong learned something Australians already knew. Mateship isn't a slogan, it's the reason you stand, even when everything says run, especially then. And somewhere in the gray aftermath, under a sky finally clearing, a Viet Cong commander looks at the ruins of his certainty, bodies in the mud, abandoned weapons, shattered formations, and understands the difference that matters most in war. Australians could be beaten, but they could not be broken. And that difference changes everything, long after the last shot, long after the rain stops falling, long after the war ends.